What's up, interpreters? I'm Nadina Galle. I'm a Dutch-Canadian ecological engineer, National Geographic Explorer, and author of the brand new book, The Nature of Our Cities.
What's up, interpreters? I'm Heather Manier, your Corporate Engagement and Partnerships Manager at the National Association for Interpretation.
What's up, interpreters? This is Song, and I'm your Events and Engagement Manager as well with NAI. And Nadina, it's so great to have you on our podcast.
Thank you, Song and Heather. So good to be back after being one of the presenters at Intertech in 2022, was it?
I don't know. Maybe it was
I don't
21.
remember either. I was trying to think of that. It was either 21 or 22.
Yeah.
Those years all meld together.
Yes, right after 2020, it was kind of hard to remember stuff for sure. But thank you so much for being here. And it's exciting. Your book's getting ready to launch on June 18th, huh?
Yes, yeah, very much. I mean, I assume this is just listening audience. Here it
is. We can see the cover with the tree, the
There it
nature
is.
of our cities.
Yeah,
So,
I'm
Nadina,
really excited.
You've been on Intertech with us. You've been a presenter. How has your work, with the Internet of Nature, which is an amazing concept, how does that blend with the practice of interpretation? Tell us a little bit about the Internet of Nature.
Yeah, so the Internet of Nature came up because I was frustrated by the lack of technologies in the smart city movement that were specifically focused on enhancing and mapping and monitoring urban nature, which I argue is the very existence to urban life. Without our ecosystems, there is no urban life. So it really came up as a way to put a special focus on ways that we might be able to preserve and enhance urban nature in our cities in the modern world using modern innovations. And I think there's a lot of beautiful crossover with the area of interpretation, especially when it comes to using technologies like augmented reality, geolocated sound, talking trees, texting trees. There's a lot of different ways that we can enhance really user experience in the urban forest or in the nature of our cities in our natural parks in a way that really engages people to one, I think, understand and learn more about urban nature, and then secondly, hopefully care more about urban nature because we need all hands on deck.
One of your titles is Ecological Engineer. I think, did you get a degree in ecological engineering, or how did that come about? And can you tell us a little bit more about that and what that is?
Yeah, so I got my PhD in ecological engineering, which is a relatively up and coming field. It was only founded about 40 years ago. It essentially is the science, and I argue kind of the art of using natural elements to really kind of as a replacement of civil or man-made infrastructure. So using natural elements to be able to conquer issues like pollution and flooding and heat waves, dealing with infrastructural problems in our cities, but using natural elements to do so. So you might have come across the term of nature-based solutions. That kind of stems out of ecological engineering. So like, for example, instead of equipping every single house with air conditioners, can we perhaps plant more trees on a street to provide natural shade and natural cooling? Instead of building a huge wastewater treatment plant, can we perhaps come up with green bioswales and this kind of area, these flooding buffers around our communities and our homes? So it's basically using natural elements as a way to solve our urban problems, and using nature not just to solve those problems, but also as a way to enhance and beautify our cities.
I'm always kind of curious how people get where they are. And so, I'm kind of curious what your undergraduate and graduate degrees are, if you want to talk about that, but also just what in your life prompted you to start caring about this?
Yeah, I got my bachelor's in ecology and evolutionary biology, and then after that, my master's in earth sciences before moving on to the PhD. So always kind of in this, roughly call it ecology kind of area. But that's not necessarily what I wanted to study coming out of high school. I actually desperately wanted to go to journalism school. I wanted to write, and that was I love doing that the most. I wrote all the time. And I applied to journalism school and I didn't get into the best and really the only journalism school in Canada. So I rapidly needed a plan B. So I decided to study the outdoors, which I mean, I had biology class in high school, but I didn't know what ecology was until I got to university and realized that's what they called the study of the great outdoors. So I was very, very happy to do that. And ultimately, looking back, it sent me on this 10-year academic career path that I couldn't have projected for myself. But it provided me with a lot of knowledge and even greater appreciation of something that I already loved, and ultimately provided me for the material that I would ultimately write a book about. So in many ways, it kind of feels like coming full circle. And I don't really know if I had anything that pressing to write about at 18. So I think it worked out.
So, using nature-based solutions for urban, like you're saying, urban issues, urban problems, have you been a part of any projects where you can see kind of the start to finish of, not only your knowledge and your work, but, in incorporating community efforts as well?
Yeah, I think I write about this in the beginning of the book, actually. One of my favorite projects it was a very typical tree planting project in the sense that there's an area in Maastricht, the city in the south of the Netherlands. They wanted to plant 1,800 linden trees and to create kind of this green boulevard on what used to be a big highway. They basically decided to move the cars underground to tunnel them. And then on top of that, build something called the green carpet or the groene loper in Dutch. And it was basically this green boulevard with 1,800 newly planted linden trees, and then just small one-way roads on either side, and like a huge walking path and cycle walkway in the middle of this green park. So it was this like huge kilometer-long park. And what was interesting or atypical really about that project is the ultimate goal that they wanted to do, which was ensure that via the planting of this park and the caring and nurturing of the green space there, they wanted the surrounding residents to live 5 years longer, which was such a unique, really goal. I'd never really been part of anything like that before. I mean, we see a lot of greening projects and interventions, but none that had been quite so ambitious as to put a goal or a desired outcome on people's lifespan. So I thought that was really, really cool. But it also meant that the trees that were planted there had to do really well and had to survive first and foremost and hopefully thrive. And I think that's something that we see missing in a lot of tree planting campaigns is that we kind of, plant these trees willy-nilly and we don't really think about much of their aftercare. And you have politicians, coming out with the shovel photos to, take their picture and cut the ribbon and do all the things. That there's not really any care put towards the aftercare really of these trees, which, makes or breaks a lot of these projects. And one of the ways that I was able to get involved in this was by the use of soil sensors. So we actually installed a number of soil sensors, actually only 3 for these 1,800 trees. And we're able to track really diligently exactly where and when trees needed to be watered. And that ultimately now, 6 years on, has resulted out of 1,800 trees, only 1 tree death. And in comparison, we did a comparison with the arborists who were working on the site with another location, and they planted a similar amount of trees, similar climate, similar conditions, and they lost in the increasingly hot and dry summers over 20% of their trees. So it was just this beautiful kind of clear cookie cutter example of the how important nature is and also the way that technology can assist it when necessary.
That's insane. What a long-term project though, right? Because then you're waiting, because if the ultimate goal is to have people live 5 years longer, do
Yeah.
they have any idea when they'll kind of see that, see if they've met the goal or starting to meet the goal?
Yeah, and how to measure that is also
Mhm.
something
Right.
difficult, right? How do you measure that someone is indeed living a longer life, and more importantly, how do you then associate that back to trees? So that's something that's really difficult that they're still very much figuring out. But we do have more and more research coming out and more tools coming out to actually help us make really quantify a lot of these health benefits that urban nature can offer us. One of the most compelling studies that I came across recently was by a USDA forest researcher called Jeffrey Donovan, who's based in the Pacific Northwest. And he actually showed through his research that over a 10-year period with the rise of emerald ash borer, which kills ash trees at an alarming rate, in neighborhoods that were most affected by emerald ash borer were actually the neighborhoods that also had an additional, I think it was 12,500 cardiovascular deaths and some 6,500 additional lower respiratory deaths. And I think that was so interesting because, yeah, even though these are associations, it's very, very difficult in this line of research to have correlations and causations for that matter. You cannot take urban forestry and urban ecology into a lab. It's just, we'll never be able to do the kind of research where we're able to control all of these different confounding factors. But I think we're getting close to be able to showing quite in statistical significance anyways, these associations that can happen, which I think is going to be such a game changer for this industry because clearly the environmental reasons for maintaining urban ecology haven't been enough because we're still losing greenery at an alarming rate.
And so, because most of these projects are within public spaces, right? Could interpretation then help really explain the project and the impact of the project, using either non-personal interpretation, like, really great signage, or sometimes if you are in, maybe a state park, there could be an actual interpreter or park ranger then providing this information. How does one get all of this, really scientific information to somebody such as an interpreter who then needs to speak to the public and provide this, more expanded, narrative about what this project is and the benefits?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways that technology can help here as well. I think one of them being that there are so many great initiatives happening now, which can actually get citizens and interpreters involved in identifying the species that are in a natural area and then uploading those to, for example, iNaturalist and having those be used for biodiversity research. But you're contributing to that research, but in turn, you're also learning about those species and learning about what they contribute to that area and being able to then transfer that information to your visitors or to your users, I think is really interesting. Another project that I talk about in the book is called The Giants of North, which was a project that actually gave trees a voice in Amsterdam North, a rapidly developing neighborhood, very typical post-industrial neighborhood dealing with a lot of issues like urban pollution and gentrification and the housing crisis and immigration. And what they did is they took these very human stories and they using geolocated sound, so basically like an immersive audio tour, but instead of at every stop, where you're having to scan a QR code, you're actually brought on this immersive audio tour where your GPS actually triggers the next audio segment. So you press play at the start location, and for an hour and a half, you have your phone in your back pocket and you're not looking at it. And you're enjoying as these trees start talking to you. And each tree has their own individual story that much parallels some of the issues that these urban residents are going through. So, for example, there was this one tree that's talking about how lonely she feels because she's planted in the middle of this square that is far away from all of her other tree friends, for example, or another tree that was planted beside a highway. So he actually started coughing before you could see the tree. And it gives this really kind of a human dimension to something that often doesn't get a voice of its own. So it's an interesting thing that I think also interpreters can learn from, this idea that when we anthropomorphize trees or other natural elements for that matter, by giving, it a name or coming up with a story or retelling its history in kind of a creative way like that, you're bringing people into that and you're able to share things like, well, I filter the air and I provide these health benefits and I do all these things, but you're able to tell that story in a really engaging way without it just becoming a rambling off of different scientific statistics and facts.
Will you talk a little also, since we're on these trees, about the tweeting tree project?
Yes, yeah. Oh yeah, that was the third one. Thanks. That was the third
Oh
one I
yeah,
wanted to
thank you.
mention. Yeah. So the tweeting tree is interesting as well. So it's another way to give trees this voice that they wouldn't normally have. It was inspired by Tim Rademacher, and he's a plant physiologist at Harvard University, and he was a postdoc researcher at the time. And he decided that he was inspired by this book about the oak trees that were in the Harvard Forest Preserve. And what he did is he hooked up this tree to all kinds of different sensors, and that sensor data was then translated automatically into tweets. So this tree had its own Twitter account and it would tweet things out like, oh my, like it's particularly warm today. Like, I'm feeling this. And, when a tree gets warm, these are the effects that I might feel. Oh, it's particularly wet today. Actually, come to look at it, and it would actually refer back to Harvard's massive climate data database that they had. Oh, actually, the last, cold day that it was unseasonably cold like this was actually, only 2 years ago, and we have this season. So it was really kind of this climate change knowledge dissemination tool, but through the words of a tree. And I was so inspired by it that I worked with a soil sensor company in the Netherlands to come up with a tweeting tree kit, because this was a very academic project. And Tim would get a bunch of messages, be like, I want one of these in our city. And it was really difficult for him because he wasn't really in the position to replicate this in many other cities. And with his blessing, we were able to work on putting together this tweeting tree kit, which not only had tree sensors, but also soil sensors, which is oftentimes a very undervalued resource in our cities, especially when it comes to tree growth and tree vitality. And this tweeting tree kit has now been adopted by the city of Liverpool. There's now Bowie the birch, and it is a birch tree in the center of Liverpool on a university campus. And you can actually follow Bowie the birch on Twitter, and he tweets about his daily musings and happenings in Liverpool. And sometimes even Whitney the witness tree, the tree in at the Harvard Forest Preserve, and Bowie the birch talk to each other on Twitter too, which is kind of fun.
I'd just like to come full circle here because we actually also had Tim Rademacher and Clarice Hart, who's the Director of Outreach and Education at the Harvard Forest, on Interp Tech as well. They were presenters. Really fascinating project. And Nadine, it's so cool that you helped them take that and really expand it into something that people can just, basically purchase off the shelf
Yes.
and really
Yeah.
start their own. I mean, there's definitely something to be said about popularity of, cool, nifty conservation efforts that you can.
Definitely, definitely, and it has such a wide use case because obviously the municipality is an obvious one, but also we've gotten requests from places like Arboretum. Arboretums, obviously that's a big area for interpreters as well. National parks, another area, but also like places like hospitals and mental health clinics, for
Mhm.
example, where having nature around and having a big sprawling talking tree can actually offer a lot of healing benefits to patients in those clinics as well. So there's so many different use cases. I feel like we're just at the cusp of understanding what we could do with this technology.
Yeah, that was another point Heather and I were talking about earlier, is this big wellness. I don't know if I want to call it a movement, but at least there's focus on nature really helping mental and emotional well-being, such as forest bathing, or just sitting by the water, right? Dr. Jay Nichols, the author of Blue Mind, super cool dude. Really there's been a lot of focus. And then also, of course, in the interpretive realm, that focus, that forest bathing concept really has come into play with additional classes, right? Or visitor experiences. So have you participated in like forest bathing, or Heather just did that sound bathing a couple of weeks ago, which she said was really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, no, it's so cool to see all of these ideas come into the mainstream. I think it was only 2 years ago that the Global Wellness Institute, kind of the mainstay of a lot of the things that we were just discussing here, actually named nature as their fifth pillar of health, which was, I think, a huge moment for giving, it sounds odd to say, but giving nature that legitimacy and that authority and its right to be very much in this area. It was actually, on a small side note, one of the people that I interviewed for the book and who actually wrote a testimonial as well was Dan Buettner, of Blue Zones fame. He, for those of you that aren't familiar, Dan Buettner came up with this idea of the blue zones, these different areas around the world where people on average live to be 100 or more and are very healthy while doing so. And he has these 9 pillars, if you will, these 9 commandments of what people do to qualify as one of these blue zones, what people, a centenarian in the blue zones does to become 100 or more. And what I noticed upon first look at them is that nature was not one of them. So as I'm talking and interviewing Dan, we're talking about, I was like, he's like, well, actually, now that I think about it, now as we're having this conversation, nature kind of provides the backdrop to many of these commandments within the blue zones philosophy, whether that's going outside for your exercise, whether that's having a garden, whether that's eating a healthy diet, ideally as locally as possible, whether that's offering a place for social connection. He's like, now that I think about it, it's not necessarily that it should be one of the nine. It's kind of the centerpiece of all of these nine things. And I include that story in the book. And I just thought it was, again, like such a beautiful, this moment where we're kind of, I think we've just, for so long, we've taken nature for granted. And now we're kind of seeing it as this really central um, centerpiece, really, to a lot of these wellness and these health and well-being discussions that we're having, which is so great to see. And to your question, Song, about forest bathing, not necessarily forest bathing, but I did get the opportunity to take part in an ecotherapy session, and I write about this in the mental health chapter of the book, which was a ecotherapist named Blake Ellis, who actually takes campfire survivors in Paradise, California, back to ground zero, if you will. This, and I think it's particularly interesting for a wildfire survivor to actually find healing specifically in the forest, because the forest is also where this rampage and this devastation happened. You know, the thing that burned, the thing that maybe destroyed their home, destroyed their livelihood, perhaps even where they lost family members or loved ones too. So it's this deeply odd thing where we're finding healing in nature, even though nature might have been the thing that quote unquote caused this disaster. So I think there's a lot of beauty to be found there as well.
Do you, in your, I'm not quite sure how to ask this question actually, but you travel quite a bit, right? Around the world, maybe, or can you see this, the intersect between nature and technology? Does it differ in different countries as far as accepting new technology, accepting that intersection? But I know for interpreters that I talk to, mostly in the US, anecdotally, they've had issues with trying to interpret climate change, and depending on where they are, they can be met defensiveness, and it can be a little bit adversarial at times, depending on, again, where they are in the US. So I guess I'm wondering, can you tell a difference between, as you travel around the world, cultures that are accepting of, this technology and sort of understanding what's happening? Because part of this is climate change, right? I mean, you've talked about that's partly why you're putting the soil sensors and things like that, right? Things have changed, and so we're trying to get a grasp of what's happening now. So are there different places that are more accepting or less accepting?
I would say definitely one of the main topics I talk about in the book is how can we show, not tell, but how can we show practitioners in the field that technology can be a useful tool? That technology is not going to replace you, that technology is not going to take your job, but that technology can make your work more fun, less tedious, and more efficient and optimized. And there are definitely around the world, there are different, cultural approaches to that. There are places, areas that I interviewed in Canada and US, in Europe, where there was a lot of hesitation, a lot of wanting to hold back and cling maybe to more traditional methods, let's say. And then there's a place like Singapore, which is like, well, why would you not? They didn't have a big value add to technology. It was like, well, it's just a tool. We'd be silly not to use it, as long as nature still is first, and as long as nature is or technology is helping us preserve nature and do our jobs correctly and efficiently, then why wouldn't we use it? So that shows, because Singapore is one of the most technologically advanced when it comes to their urban green infrastructure. I mean, every single tree is completely mapped there. They've been able to significantly cut down on tree incidents, meaning where trees and people come into conflict with one another. And that is in a city with over 7 million trees. So they've been able to really change, and I think most importantly, provide real data to change opinions about the perceived danger of trees, which still plagues a lot of cities around the world, that trees can be dangerous, that trees are risky, that trees are dangerous. But knowledge is power, and the more that we're able to better track these things, the safer we can keep our communities from potential tree incidents, and the better we can communicate that they're indeed not a danger. In fact, it's dangerous not to have them.
I'm going to use that next time I'm late for work. I had a tree incident.
Don't ask questions.
Yeah, don't ask questions. So everybody's fine.
It certainly happens in Fort Collins. I mean, the wind will whip up
yes.
and there are trees everywhere. Like I always tell my kids, listen for the cracks while you're walking through town, please, because
Yes.
you hear the crack and then it comes down.
Yeah.
Well,
Um,
it'll work in Fort Collins for your song. I don't think it'll work in Singapore though, if you happen to be there.
okay, noted. I'll find a different excuse to be late. Um, Nadina, I think that, climate change and just socioeconomic issues around the globe always turn the conversation into more of a deep and frustrating and kind of depressing topic. But your book seems to be very forward thinking in a very positive way about the future of our cities. And how do you go about turning a topic like that can be, again, very depressing, or as Heather mentioned, kind of resisted as a whole? How do you turn that into something that is, something to think about that's actually positive?
Yeah, I think there's two main ideas there. One, that's just who I am. I'm an optimistic person, and I think as soon as we give in to pessimism, as soon as we give in to like, well, it's all doom and gloom anyways, why bother? Then we've already lost. So I don't subscribe to climate anxiety or eco-alarmism or the doom and gloom narrative that is often unfortunately associated with climate change. I really want to show people that, and that's the second point in all of this, that nature is really synonymous with abundance. And it's rather, we've been told for so many years, okay, climate change is coming. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And we've really have this not only as doom and gloom, but this also very reductionistic approach to things where we need to make ourselves smaller as individuals and we need to take up less space and when you optimize for reducing CO2 in that way, ultimately what that ends in is that people can't even breathe because we expel CO2 when we breathe. So that to me is felt really anti-human in a lot of ways. And I like the idea of promoting more nature in cities because it feels like we're also creating more abundance and more hope and more joy in the areas where we live. And I wish I could have called the book "The Nature of Where We Live" rather than "The Nature of Our Cities," because it's not just about. Often cities think about when we think about cities, we think about the central business districts and these really dense urban cores. But the nature of our cities is about those areas, but it's also about suburbia and towns and villages and really anywhere where we live. It's about having that nature at our doorstep. It's something that everybody can contribute to, and it's about creating hope and optimism in even if it's just a little square area just in front of your own home. And I think that's something that has such a direct individual impact on everybody. It feels like you do have some ownership over and responsibility of where the world is headed. And if everyone just took good care of that surroundings just around their home, I feel like we'd be in a better place.
So Nadina, we are really thrilled about your book launch. And Heather, I think we're reading it for book club. Is
We
that
are,
true?
yes. For the nature of our cities, we will have a book club in August, and there's a companion reading guide. So anybody who signs up for the book club can get the companion reading guide for that.
Okay, well, this is not a spoiler alert, but Nadina, what kind of key takeaways are you hoping that readers of the book will take away with them?
I think the primary thing that I would hope people take away is that nature is all around us. I think we've grown up with this idea that nature is something that we need to visit, that nature is somewhere that is far, far away, and we've taken for granted the nature that is at our doorstep. And that is really what it's about, because that is really the only thing we might have a little bit of control over. So I would encourage everybody to one, step outside and just observe and witness what it is that they have around them. Two, see if there are steps that you can take to enhance that in some way. Can you engage your neighbors? Can you make it bigger? Can you preserve it if it's threatened? And three, see if you can also encourage other people in your community to do the same. To even just, instead of going for coffee with a friend or going to see a movie, can you suggest that you go for a hike or a trail or a walk even in your neighborhood, and do this with your neighbors and with your friends and get in your daily nature dose? Because I really believe that the more time that we spend in nature, the more we learn and understand it, and the more we can do to protect it. And we need it desperately in the cities of the future, now and in the future.
Awesome. Well, Nadina, thank you so much for being with us on this podcast. And for everybody out there, you can visit her website, Nadina, either Galle or Galle, NadinaGalle.com, and get those resources and pick up the book there as well. Again, thank you so much. We get to see you, Heather and I, but everybody else gets to listen to this podcast, and it's been an absolute pleasure. And just really, seriously, keep up the good work. It's pretty amazing.
Thank you. And thanks so much to NAI for all the support you've shown me over the years. I really appreciate it.
And interpreters, that's what's up.